Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eleanor Grix. I am the department head for Humanities and Fine Arts here at Savannah Tech, and I am also the author of this Art Appreciation Blackboard course. I wrote the tests, wrote the homework assignments. I hope you enjoy the class. Now, it may not be your actual teacher. You might be taking the class with another teacher, so check the front page on Blackboard to confirm that. This video is intended to give you some information on navigating your textbook and understanding the labels of works of art, understanding the subject of a work of art, the medium, the dimensions, the artist, the information about the art. So I wanted to start here with your textbook because I wanted to show you how to navigate it. In this course, the tests are written with image numbers that you are going to have to look up. And test 1 specifically is meant to be almost a review of the entire textbook, not just chapter 1, but a review on how to search for images. So for example, you might come across a test question that reads, "Who is the artist of image 23.5? And the idea is that you need to look it up. Now, keep in mind, it's not section 23.5, but image number 23.5 or figure 23.5. So a test question that reads, who is the artist of this work of art? The answer would be René Magritte. By the way, in case you write about this artist, that is a man's name. René Magritte is actually a man's name. The reason why the test questions are phrased as who is the artist of 23.5 instead of who is the artist of this painting or who is the artist of The Lovers 1928, that's something that you could look up in Google. I want you to use the textbook in this class. And so being able to navigate and find images, this is something that I'm going to test you on in your Unit 1 test. So make sure that you're comfortable with browsing the images and using that search function. So now for the information on how to actually understand information like who is the artist, what's the title. All right, so here's a little PowerPoint presentation. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over information that you're given about an art label, and it covers two very important vocabulary terms, the terms medium and subject. These are two aspects of art that are very important. Medium is the material that is used to make the work of art, simply put, what it's made of. Subject is what the artist chooses to depict. What is a picture of? The reason why I'm going over all this information is because I tend to come across a lot of mistakes, especially in essays. I want to make sure that whenever you're writing about art, you're not just looking at the image, you're also looking at the information accompanying the image. Some common mistakes that I see is not understanding the medium of a work of art. Sometimes people tend to call every single work of art a painting or a photo. This photo by Leonardo da Vinci. Make sure that you get the medium right. Misidentifying the artist, not understanding who made the art. Sometimes people are confused about the date. When was a work of art made? Maybe confusing the image date with the dates of the artist. When, for example, Vincent van Gogh was born and died. A very common mistake is not understanding the subject of a work of art, writing about it without really understanding what the story is. Sometimes you might have to do a little, looking up, a little bit of Googling to understand the subject. And also, calling every single work of art a portrait is another common mistake that I see. A lot of times whenever you look at a work of art, I think it's very important to look at the dimensions. This is especially true when you're writing about works of art that you encounter in a book or on a website where everything is presented the same size. It's important to understand the dimensions. So let's go back to those terms, medium and subject. Okay, so once again, the medium of a work of art is the material and technique, simply put, what it is made of. The techniques in art, also sometimes called classifications, include paintings, sculptures, photographs, prints, etc. This is what type of art it is. But it's not merely enough to look at this work of art and know that it is a painting. You need to know the media used. What type of paint was used to make that image? Oil paint, for example, is very common. But there are other types of media used in painting. If you came across a work of art that said encaustic on panel or called a work of art a fresco, you may not know that that work of art should be called a painting. You might mistakenly call it a photo. Another good example are sculptures. This is a type of art. The medium is what the sculpture specifically is made of. For example, marble is a sculptural media. Granite, bronze, iron, plastic, clay, or ceramics is very common. The reason why I'm such a stickler on getting the medium right is because making a sculpture out of clay versus making a sculpture out of marble are two very different methods. True, they are both sculptures, but they're very different media that are handled different ways. As I said, another common mistake is students not understanding the subject of a work of art. That is, what the artist chooses to depict. So subject is representational art, what the artist is depicting, what is an image of. Representational, by the way, is just a fancy way of saying it's a picture of something, as opposed to non-representational art, which is fully abstract. A work of art can be very abstract, but still have a subject. You can still tell what it is. For instance, these are some common subjects in art. Portraits, I've already mentioned. A portrait is an image that depicts a person, usually just the head and shoulders, a portrait of an individual. Sometimes works of art are landscapes, a long view of the countryside, mountains, and the sea. Sometimes the subject of a work of art comes from the Bible or from mythology. The work of art might depict an historic event. It could be a still life, genre scenes. These are some subjects in works of art. And again, art that does not have a subject could be classified as non-representational, meaning it is just colors and shapes and lines. All right, so for an example on how to read a label, let's say you are asked to look up image 21.1 in your textbook. So here it is, figure 21.1. That means, by the way, that it is from chapter 21, image 1. The artist is listed first, then the title. Below the image, we have the date, the medium, and dimensions. So over there on the right, you can see I've laid out what each thing means. The artist is Jacques-Louis David. The title is The Oath of the Orati. There's the date that it was made, 1784. And there is a common medium that you're going to see in art. Oil on canvas, meaning that this is a painting. It was made with oil paint on a canvas support, as opposed to oil on panel, oil on linen. These are other supports. Okay, dimensions. How big is this work of art? A question might read. That's listed down here. And it gets a little bit cluttered in the font, but it says 10, 1 tick mark, 10, 2 tick marks. The single apostrophe signifies feet, and the quotation marks that you see there, that's shorthand for inches. How large is this work of art? 10 feet, 10 inches tall by 14 inches wide. Dimensions are given height by width. So that is how large this image is. By the way, pretty big painting. And just for your own sake, below that information, we're given information about the Holding Museum, in this case, the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. And we also have here the copyright information, the people who are credited with taking this photograph. By the way, that is not relevant in any assignment in this class. And don't confuse, say, Gerard Blot or Christian Jean as the artist of this work of art. This is a painting made by whom? Jacques-Louis David. Now let's talk about that title, The Oath of the Orati. The title often gives us a hint to the subject, but in this case you might need to look it up. Who are the Orati and what is the oath? The subject of this painting by David, it's a story from Roman legend, Roman history, about three brothers who swore an oath upon their swords that they would use them to defend Rome, that they would fight and die for the cause of the Roman Republic. So this is them swearing that oath. That is the subject of the work of art. And as I told you, the title of a work of art sometimes is the subject. So here are some pretty basic subjects. A portrait of this man. The subject of this painting is the crucifixion. That's what is happening in this work of art. I imagine you are probably familiar with the story of the crucifixion. It's a common subject in the art. This is one version. The subject of this painting on the bottom left is a still life, meaning an image of inanimate objects, usually fruit and flowers. The painting on the bottom right, what's that church? It says so in the title, the church at Auvers. So many times the title will give you a hint as to what the subject is. But even then, you might still need to do a little bit of looking up. Go online and punch in the title if you don't really understand what's happening in the work of art. An example that I'm fond of is this painting by Rubens. It's called The Judgment of Paris. And if I asked you to write a paper on Rubens' The Judgment of Paris, and in your paper you said, well, I don't see the Eiffel Tower anyway, well, that's misunderstanding the subject. The Judgment of Paris is a story from mythology. Paris is the guy on the left, the one who's wearing the leopard skin. He is judging a beauty contest between three goddesses. If you're a fan of Greek mythology and those kind of stories, you might have heard of this. But if you didn't, the title The Judgment of Paris might be a bit confusing because you might associate that title with a city in France. Another favorite title that I like for its confusion is Luther Before the Diet of Worms. Ew. Why is this guy eating worms, you might say? That's not what's happening. In this case, that bald-headed man is Luther, as in Martin Luther. And a diet is a term for a sort of a trial of sorts, or a conclave. Luther is attending a diet in the city of Worms, Germany, and he is defending his criticisms of the Catholic Church and its management. So that is the subject of this work of art. It's a scene from history depicting an historic individual. So if you were to write a paper on Luther before the Diet of Worms, and in that paper wrote about how gross you think it is that he's going to eat bugs, again, you've misunderstood the subject. So the title does tell us what it's an image of, but you might need to do a little bit of research. And sometimes, by the way, titles are not the subject. This is a random assortment of works of art where the titles are rather poetic. So if I asked you what is the subject of, say, Forever Free, it is a woman with her children. That is what it is an image of. So many times the title tells us the subject of the art, but again, sometimes it's a bit more poetic. The subject is what you see, what the artist has depicted. All right, so let's take a look at some works of art and some questions that you might expect on your first test. So, one question that I ask my students in my campus class, I show them this image and I say, true or false? This work of art is a painting. Well, take a look. The medium is pastel on paper. As it happens, pastel, it's a drawing material. Pastels are very similar to chalks or crayons even. To call this a painting is incorrect. This work of art is a drawing. And as long as we're looking at the label, let's take a look at the title of this work of art. Self-portrait. So, as we've already said, a portrait is a work of art depicting a person, usually the face and shoulders, And in this case, the work of art is a self-portrait, which you may already know what that means. It is a portrait of the artist created by that own artist himself. So who is this handsome young man? It's that guy, Maurice Quentin de la Tour. This is a self-portrait. Not every portrait is a self-portrait. All right. So here's a work of art that I just love. It's so cool. It's at the Met Museum in New York. If you had a test question, how big is this work of art? Well, take a look at the dimensions down here. I'm going to zoom in. 96.5 inches by 199.5 inches. Well, that might be a little bit hard to parse. So you might need to break out the old calculator. 199 divided by 12. This work of art is 16 feet long. It's pretty big. So you might need to break out that calculator in order to understand how large a work of art is, what the dimensions are. So this work of art, as it happens, is about 8 feet tall, 16 feet wide. It's pretty impressive. All right. And just for the record, the artist, Rosa Bonheur, a female artist, so cool. The title is The Horse Fair. That also gives us an idea of what the subject is. This is a painting done with oil paints on canvas, and it was made from 1853 to 55. This is a work of art that actually took quite a long time to make, about 2 years to create. The date is given as a range, and that's something that you're going to see. When was this work of art made? From 1853 to 55, and it's a very large painting. All right, understanding dates. Here's a work of art from chapter 15 in your textbook, which covers ancient Egypt. I bet you can tell just from looking at this that this is a work of art from Egypt. It is extremely old. Take a look at the date. So 1450 BCE. All right, sometimes this confuses my students. I bet you that you probably learn dates as being BC and AD. BC meaning before Christ. AD, by the way, doesn't mean after death. If that was the case, we'd have a 30-plus year gap of the dates of Christ. AD stands for Anno Domini, Latin. It means the year of our Lord. So your dates are probably understood as before Christ and Anno Domini, BC and AD. This says BCE. That means before the Common Era. You might also come across works of art that say 50 CE. That means Common Era. BCE and CE mean the exact same things as BC and AD. I know it's confusing, and for the record, I am totally fine if you use the terms BC and AD to write about works of art, but that's not what your textbook does. It uses the terms BCE and CE, so now you know what that means. And to further take a look at the date, you'll notice that there's this little lowercase c in front of the date. That little c stands for circa, meaning about or approximately. When was this work of art made? Around 1450 BCE. All right. So I told you that whenever you're looking at works of art in your textbook or in a museum, you're given the artist's name. But take a look at this piece here, image 16.7. In this case, there's no artist listed. Sometimes the artist isn't known. That was also the case for that wall painting we just looked at. Sometimes the artists are just not recorded, especially whenever they're as old as this. We do, though, have the basic title, Christ as Pantocrator, with Mary and saints. You might have to look up the term Pantocrator to know what that means. But the subject, you could probably tell, is Jesus Christ and Mary, some angels, and saints. I wanted to use this to point out the medium. It says apse mosaic. A mosaic is a type of art that's made with tiny little tiles glued to the walls. To call this work of art a painting would be incorrect. Also, it wouldn't be correct to analyze this work of art as a photograph. Now, I can't deny that down here it says photograph, Scala Florence. And yes, I guess it's true. This is a photograph of a church. But to call this work of art a photo, I feel is incorrect. It's more correct to analyze this as a mosaic. That's the medium of the art. Something else that's kind of interesting, occasionally you'll come across works of art that have a location. The Cathedral of Montreal in Sicily. Occasionally works of art were made for a particular location and they're fixed, like the Sistine Chapel ceiling or the Great Pyramids. They are made for a fixed location. Okay, now date. When was this work of art made? It says late 12th century. 12th century, what does that mean? Okay, sometimes this confuses students. The 12th century is actually the 1100s. Century dating sometimes trips my students up. They might take a look at a work of art and it says, oh, this was made in the 19th century, and they think that means the 1900s. But that's not the case. The 19th century is actually the 1800s. So here's a little flow chart to give you an idea of how century dating works. BCE or CE, it's almost like telling time on a clock as opposed to digital time. If a work of art was made in the late 20th century, that means it was made in the late 1900s. So this is something I'm going to quiz you on in the first test, so you might have to look that up. So hopefully this is a good overview of understanding title, artist, medium, date, because I, again, want to make sure that you're always looking at the labels. You're not just looking at the image or the subject. This is a favorite of mine. This is a work of art by a contemporary artist, Fabienne Peña. The subject of the art is a skull. That's what it's an image of. But take a look. I imagine you might have already noticed it since I've told you to look at the label. Look at the medium. Cockroach wing fragments on paper inside a light box. This is not a painting, and honestly, I'm not sure how I would classify this. I'd probably just play it safe and call it a work of art or a piece. But yeah, this is not a painting or a drawing. This is a work of art that's made entirely out of little cockroach wings, all cut up into little pieces. And now I imagine you have all sorts of crazy questions going through your head, like, why? Where did he get the cockroach wing fragments? Did he cut them up himself? And what's the deal with this work of art? And how many did he have to use to create it? Well, looking at the dimensions might help. Not 12 feet tall, that would be pretty grim, 12 inches tall. So here's an image of the work of art in the gallery there on the top left, and an assortment of other pieces by Fabienne Peña. Once again, understanding the medium is very crucial to understanding the significance of a work of art and what makes it interesting. So it's not just about looking at the image, oh, look, it's a skull. It's about understanding who made it, when, what it is, what it's made of. This is all very important information in art appreciation. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can just email your teacher right from the front page. Thanks so much.